Yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay,
I can
cool.
see you.
Great, thanks. Thanks. As you can see on the agenda, the title being Presentation on IPE Badging, we're having MJ Bishop with us, and myself and Susan Antol and Ed will be, Ed Habarek, I know I go by Ed, will also be speaking. For those of you that are not familiar with MJ Bishop, goodness, she is the Associate Vice Chancellor and Director of the Center for William E. Kirwan Center for Academic Innovation. And she has been in that role, I believe, from what I understand, MJ, since 2013. There's been a great deal of work she's been involved in regarding reaching out. We talk about badging, we talk about credentialing, we're talking about online learning. There's so many different initiatives going on. For the purposes of today, we're going to be focusing more on some topics, and MJ will take off here in a minute and add a few things, but speaking in terms of this whole topic of digital badging and credentialing and where it is and where it's been and what she's been involved in for the many years with, and even with the Greater Washington Partnership, how we're dealing more with our businesses and our organizations within the state, and getting our students ready, so to speak, to meet those challenges. She's also involved heavily with more in the terms of when we think of interprofessional education, as I will speak up on that after MJ, Susan, and Ed too, where we're looking at it and thinking in terms of professionals learning with and from each other. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But MJ, I hope I gave you a little bit of an intro,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Karen. Mary, are you going to show my slides, or shall I go ahead and do that myself?
I have them set up. I was just waiting for you.
I'm happy to do it if I'm able to, if you've given me the power. It looks like I can.
Well, no, I said I have them set up. Just
Oh.
say when you want to let loose.
Okay, let loose, please.
Can everybody see them?
Yep, thank you. So thank you again for that introduction, Karen. That was very kind of you. And I appreciate the time today to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that we've been doing and try to give you maybe a little bit of alternative credential 101 background on this discussion before I kick it back over to Karen to talk more specifically about the IPE work. Next slide, please. So many of you have seen the headlines. You know, headlines like this in 2013, Gallup Lumina indicated that from a survey that many business leaders really don't believe that we're graduating students with the kinds of skills and competencies their business need. And in fact, many actually strongly disagree with these kinds of statements. And these are the sorts of headlines that have been in the news for some time. Next slide. More recently, a National Association of Colleges and Employers survey indicated that that there are sizable gaps between what employers believe are essential skills for college graduates to have, which are the red bars, versus their perception of the extent to which our graduates are proficient in these skills. Now, I don't doubt that some of our graduates may, in fact, not be leaving our campuses with the kinds of skills that employers tell us they're seeking. But my hypothesis has been for some time, and I know Joe Boffman's as well, that many actually do possess these skills, but may not be as articulate about the extent to which they have these skills or able to point to the kind of evidence that they've acquired these skills during their time on our campuses. Next slide. As a result, when our graduates are asked to answer these difficult interview questions like, tell me about a time you chose to follow instead of lead, or tell me about a time you had to communicate bad news, or other sorts of things, they're not easily able to connect the dots between their campus experiences and these higher order skills that the employers are seeking. Next slide, please. In fact, in 2016, we worked with a consulting firm called Entangled Solutions to help us with leading focus group conversations with regional employers. And one of the findings from that work was that, in fact, regional employers believe that recent graduates lack a deep understanding of the role that, of what a role actually entails and requires when they're applying for positions. They seem to lack excitement and confidence around critical points in the hiring process. There's a misalignment between the ways in which our students are articulating the skills they have and the skills that are sought in the job descriptions. And generally that the employers feel like the recent graduates aren't doing such a good job of packaging and synthesizing these accomplishments. Next slide, please. So one potential explanation is that while our students are completing assignments in their majors and doing all the things we ask them to do and having experiences off camp or, through extracurricular activities and so forth, all of which that are helping them actually acquire these skills, we rarely make these things explicit in our curriculum and in our teaching, and even less often actually directly assess them in ways that make it clear to our students that they are acquiring critical thinking skills, project management skills, and so forth. Next slide. In addition, we're not providing any specific information about what our students know and are able to do in any official documentation that we provide to employers. What the employers get on a transcript is only what the students were taught, and even at that, it's just course names and numbers. It's not descriptive enough for employers to understand what it is our students are acquiring in terms of those higher order skills. Next slide. And while our career centers are certainly there to help and have done amazing work with our students, they're fairly limited in their ability to engage students one-on-one. In fact, most of our career centers are staffed, much like our teaching and learning centers, based on the numbers of people that actually come to them. So if they were to begin to scale up and to try to create this kind of opportunity, career readiness opportunity for all of our students, unfortunately, they would be sorely understaffed. Next slide. Last but not least, often what these career centers will do is, of course, help students put all these things together into a resume, a cover letter, and so forth. But one of the things that employers are concerned about is the extent to which those are really validated experiences. So I may, in my resume and cover letter, be very articulate about my leadership skills, but our institutions aren't providing that additional validation of those kinds of skills to the employers as well. So next slide. Sorry, Mary, I'm making you really exercise your next slide button here. Enter digital badges. Unlike a traditional transcript that simply lists what students are taught, digital badges are designed to make visible and validate learning from any kind of formal or informal setting. So they're sort of like little mini e-portfolios in that they carry with them evidence of what the badge earner did, an explanation for how the skills represented by the badge were assessed, and information that speaks to the credibility of the badge issuer itself, like endorsements or, in our case, accreditation. Next slide, please. So one of the things Elizabeth wanted me to be sure to hit on was the difference between a lot of these terms. And I'm going to tell you, they are getting conflated all the time in a way that I think makes things very confusing. I borrowed a couple of great definitions from SUNY and the MacArthur Foundation here, but let's start with microcredential. So at the most basic level, a microcredential is something that verifies, validates, and attests to specific skills or competencies that have been achieved. They differ from traditional degrees and certificates only in that they are generally offered in shorter or more flexible time spans and tend to be more narrowly focused. A badge, which is often used interchangeably with microcredential, mistakenly, I think, is just a technology. So like I just described, it's a tool that allows for better communication of those skills and the ways in which they were assessed and the ways in which and the authority and the ability of the badge issuer to have done a reputable job in assessing those skills. So these are things that are awarded by an institution to signify those accomplishments, much like a transcript, but they carry a lot more information in them to explain exactly what those skills are. A certificate, on the other hand, as you know, is also a smaller version of a degree. It's a subset of a degree, but it's a credential that's being issued by an institution that usually is something that has been part of an accreditation process. In Maryland, of course, certificate programs have to be approved by MHEC, for example. Micro-credentials, at least right now, so far, live outside of that world. And I'll explain a little bit more about why that is here in a minute. Lastly, certification, as you know, is also about mastery or competency in specific areas, but generally this is toward, it's a credential that's issued towards some form of licensure. So in our case, it's, for example, in the case of teacher licensure, it's something that's recognized by MSDE, but there are also certifications that are now being issued by industry organizations such as Microsoft. Next slide, please, Mary. This is actually a diagram that was provided to us by Credly, just to, again, kind of hit home this notion that a badge is in and of itself just a container and a communications device. So in this case, what Credly is suggesting is that badges, and as you know, some of you are aware, some badges can be participation badges, which is not something that I'm typically a huge fan of, except for in very specific situations. These are badges that aren't measured. It's unstructured learning. Essentially, you're giving a badge for somebody that attended a lecture or something like that. And then as you move along this continuum, you'll see you get increasingly into, and on those right two sides, the two types of credentials on the right, credentials that are being validated, that are measured and actually validating learning. And then in some cases, actually, you can also issue a badge for a full-blown certification. In fact, I've heard some folks argue that, why don't we issue badges for degrees? Now, the advantage of doing something like that, because digital badges are openly available, they're locked down through the technology to make them, you can't tamper with them. But one of the nice things about an open badge, unlike what our graduates currently experience in terms of transcripts, is that an open badge, you don't have to go back to the registrar, pay your $15 and have them issue a transcript to an employer or to whomever it may be. If we started badging degrees or using badging technology to allow degree validation to be more open, that would prevent a lot of that additional red tape and bureaucracy for our graduates. I'm not advocating for that necessarily. There are pros and cons to that, but just to give you a sense of the range of things that a badge as a technology can do. So getting back, sorry, next slide. I advanced my slide, but realized I needed to ask Mary to do that. So getting back to what we've been doing, in 2015, we started the Badging Essential Skills for Transitions initiative, in which we began this conversation by looking specifically at matriculated students and trying to understand how we might use badges to help them connect the dots in these career-ready skills that we believe they are acquiring during their time on their campuses. So the idea here was to help them see where these opportunities are to acquire these skills, to navigate their way through those experiences, and then provide a platform in which they could demonstrate and articulate their development of those skills supported by evidence. So clearly, you know, in the work that we're doing, we're trying to be sure that we're on the right side of that continuum of Credly, that the badges we work with are being validated and rigorously assessed. Next slide. So those digital badges, right now there's a set of 8 of them, include everything from collaborating to problem solving and professionalism. And if you go to the next slide, please, Mary. The way that we have this currently set up, and this will feed into some of the conversation now that Karen will give here in a minute regarding the IPE badges, is that we worked together to decide what that constellation, as they say, of badges would be. And we worked together to come to some consensus around what the criteria for acquiring those badges would be, what sorts of guideposts we would require to be somewhat uniform across these issuings of these badges across the institutions. So for example, one of the requirements for these badges is that at each milestone assessment that students go through, they're asked to reflect on the way in which they've been acquiring these skills, largely to address some of those concerns employers had about our graduates inability to be articulate about their acquisition of these skills. But at the end of the day, that yellow box, it's entirely up to the campuses themselves to figure out what are the things that add up to the acquisition of those skills, what existing programs are in place. We're trying not to be additive here, but rather to represent students' acquisitions of these skills differently, not to add new programs. So to connect those dots across that earlier slide of their degree and extracurricular activities, and to demonstrate the ways in which they're acquiring these skills. Next slide. One of the things when we began, again, talking to regional employers about this work that came out was that many of our regional employers are really struggling to try to attract enough qualified candidates into positions that they have. They're really eager to work with our students much earlier in their degree programs and to begin making connections. So next slide. One of the employers that we talked to in that conversation was Cisco. And while this initiative has been on hold a bit during the COVID crisis, what they envisioned was to engage with us in that problem-solving badge and co-designing some badge earning programs that would incorporate what they call their cyber defense clinic. Next slide. This is actually a pretty cool opportunity for students to engage in lessons, if you will, in a space that's in the cloud that gives them access to a variety of different state-of-the-art technologies, not just Cisco's, but others as well. And of course, all the lesson plans and everything are in this comic book sort of bad guy, good guy theme. And they provide the training for faculty, they provide all the equipment, and then these opportunities to work through real ransomware situations and solve them. They can either be a bad guy or a good guy and so forth. So what Cisco wanted to do was to work with us, next slide, collaboratively on co-designing these kinds of experiences. So this is just one of the ways in which, even with a badging program that we're using with matriculated students, that we could start engaging regional employers more actively in these conversations. Geico was another one that was very interested in this project, and what they wanted to do was to plug, and NASA as a matter of fact, plug into our leadership badge earning opportunities and use that as an indicator not only of students who or graduate who may be a good candidate for employment, but in Geico's case, they have a leadership program that they put new employees in, some new employees into, and they wanted to find a way to bridge that. Next slide, please. So one other, and I won't get into all the detail on this in the interest of time, but one of the other things that we learned from the employers were some of the specific things that they see that they want in a badge. They want it to be specific. They want it to be something they can easily digest quickly and easily, because as you see under immediate value, they spend an average of 6 to 12 seconds on an applicant. So this is something that needs to be clear, impact focused. They've got to know that it's rigorous. And in their case, they're looking for it to be selective. In our case, of course, while we would certainly want our graduates to stand out, we're also looking for all of them to have this opportunity to connect the dots in meaningful ways, as I said before. And by the way, I will provide all these slides, and happy also to present to your senates or anything that I can do to be helpful and also helping you get this message across to folks on your campuses. If you could go to the next slide, Mary. So having done a lot of this groundwork and had the experience that we've had so far with the digital badging work, and we've been working with, I think it's 7 of the USM institutions, and actually have had a couple of the community colleges attend some of our meetings as well. They're interested too. But we're beginning now to explore how do we now think about this micro-credentialing for non-matriculated students, and to start addressing some of the needs that our regional employers have with existing employees to upskill them or reskill them. And this Greater Washington Partnership project, which I won't get into a lot of detail on right now, is actually looking at creating opportunities for existing students to be badged in digital technology skills. So generalist technology skills, but also machine learning, data analytics, cybersecurity, and so forth. But then to do the design of those micro-credentialing opportunities with an eye toward how we might then begin offering them to non-matriculated students, either online, well, probably online. We've been working to develop modules in the edX platform for that, and to begin creating pathways into our degree programs in that way. So starting to really begin thinking about how those things come together. So if you want to go to the last slide, Mary, it's just my closing slide, but happy to answer any questions, but I'm going to kick it over to Karen right now to then describe how the IPE work is feeding back into that same model that we've created for the Career Ready badges in the BEST initiative.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now once it's ready for me to share. Thank you. If I can find it. There it is. Okay. I'm not going to be quite as official and beautiful as MJ, but we're thinking in terms of making this transition. I'm going to start here, and what I will do is go ahead and do it in a slideshow. That would work better. So what, in terms of what MJ was talking about, then we've got a category, if you want to say, where so many think of healthcare as being interprofessional education in healthcare as so different than what we can do in other disciplines. However, think in terms of what MJ was talking about, not just in the terms of or the examples of the organizations and the companies and so forth that are looking for, like cybersecurity and so forth. There's much more than that that can be utilized for all of our students. The faculty, all of us, learning more about this and recognizing what we can do as faculty, working with each other, learning from each other, and therefore working with our students across disciplines, across campuses, learning and working together, learning with each other. And so that's why I have the watermark of professions learning from and with each other. Thinking in terms of interfacing all of this different world, because we're so focused in our disciplines, and there's so much that we can utilize and integrate, interface, and engage with our students to prepare them for what employers are looking for. So in meeting with MJ, as well as Ed and Susan, myself, and they will speak in a moment, we were thinking about the idea of structure and an idea of building blocks to kind of get our heads around it. The first thing, as I have number one, intercollegiate work. It's faculty understanding and building the knowledge of how this type of professional work can cross disciplines, can engage disciplines, how we can actually create templates for it to work. With what MJ was saying towards the end, and what the employers want to see is, if you want to call it verification of how and what they develop, the different skills. MJ had a whole list of things that pop into my mind about collaboration, communication. I think a lot of the challenges that we face is, for faculty, is not having the in-depth knowledge of how this can work and how beneficial it will be, not only to the students, but to potential students, those needing to be re-engaged, and those that have lost their jobs coming back in. There's a whole gamut of things that we can do. So again, learning with and from each other as interprofessional, learning all disciplines, and engaging both faculty and students across programs and schools. So that kind of making that connection of the idea of what we already are hearing about of interprofessional education, but recognizing that the platform or the conceptualization and the principles of what is out there that we talk about interprofessional education and healthcare is absolutely transferable and implementable within our disciplines across. So engaging, collaborating, and valuing those principles. So with that, I'll move to the next slide. And this one, Susan, this is for you to
This is
step
mine.
in.
And thinking in terms of what Karen just said, one of the things that came to my mind was the work by Covey that said, begin with the end in mind. So if you vision back to the digital badges that are already in the array of those from the system, from the Kirwan Center that MJ just put in the chat box, what you really think about is look at them to think about what that skill or that badge might indicate in terms of the work that you're doing, in terms of not just your discipline, but in the different courses within the discipline, and thinking in terms also of what goes on in terms of our entry-level work versus our master's level work and beyond with that. So I like to think that there may be, as Karen indicated, perhaps some common pathways that we can use and integrate within courses or also within some deliverables. For many of us, students do have to do demonstration of those skills, either in some initiative within the class or also outside the class in the community or in the workplace where they're doing an internship or a residency. So thinking in terms of those, and then perhaps collaborating with other faculty members so that once we develop these projects, we think in terms of making them interlaced with those within another profession or discipline or major, and think about our common pathways for perhaps evaluating the work. And one instance that I thought about was some work that I had done with our National Nurse-Led Care Consortium, and this came right out of a university down in Virginia, where actually the nursing students were planning their business model with students from the School of Business. And that was one of their projects, that they had to engage each other. And it was written into the curriculum with students in one course, in the School of Nursing, and into the curriculum with the business school as well. And of course, the faculty got involved with guiding them. So looking at the critical words and taxonomies that Karen elaborated on, it's about the collaboration and the teamwork, and then how to adopt these across our different disciplines, and looking at a competency framework that perhaps we can come to some consensus about what it might look like, and then build that upward and branch into our different professions, and seeing what we have in common in terms of what we try to teach and prepare our students for. So again, we want to integrate across all the professions. And then thinking about how we work within the support systems and these integrative and innovative pathways, how we might look at the learning principles. And I think MJ did an excellent job about thinking about the institutional and business partnerships. I think in terms of interprofessional, many of us have already made some inroads in how we're educating our health profession students, but perhaps there also needs to be other ways that we integrate this across the other skill sets that our other majors need to learn. We're pretty much used to, in health professions, teaching towards the certification or the licensure. And as MJ was speaking, I thought about, well, what about these students that come out with a degree in one thing, and yet they go for a job interview in something else? Many of us know we have colleagues or students or children or relatives who have a major, and yet they go into one of the more and go into another, go look for jobs and say, well, this might fit that job. But it's really not. They're not educated as a nurse, a doctor, a physical therapist, a scientist, a geography major. Those types of individuals have to find their fit within the organization. So thinking in terms of these skills such as leadership and how that might go forward in what we're teaching across the other majors. And a lot of them are the arts degrees, the Bachelor of Arts degrees. They tend to be a little more diffuse in what we're teaching. So how can we get those collaborative skills fired up? And then thinking about individually designing things again, we're not individually designing it for each course, but maybe within our institutions and collaborating across institutions to say, how do we deal with a major, such as, you know, a biology major? How do we create that, you know, career-ready skill above and beyond being proficient in the science or in the arts? And then I think the big issue that I see coming up is, how do we really collaborate across ourselves as members of teams within our CUSF group to really provide some structure and move it through the systems that we work with? So I'll hand off to Ed.
Sure. I don't know if Karen, if you want to switch to the next slide. There we go. Great. So MJ said very well how the importance of this and how the structure is impacting the workforce that's out there and what the needs are that employers are looking for. So looking at kind of a second structure of this, you can see some of the research that identified that alternative credentials growth are nearly 1.8 billion up to 2024. The demand is growing to meet the requirements of employers and student preparation. And you can see a number of, just probably out there on the internet, you can see a number of private organizations that have really jumped on this opportunity with like Coursera and Udemy, and Emeritus has actually brought together a number of universities to provide the ability for individuals to be able to attain types of credentials or certificates, which then they can put up on their LinkedIn page, and that's with the badging. And also 94% of institutions offer alternative credentials. 1 in 5 offer digital badges focused more on business domains, which my full-time institution and I've developed badging and credentials for our institution, and institutions engage with corporations really value the alternative credentials. And they really, 64% of them note that it's very important for the future. And you can see one of the largest in a number of research with employers, one of the largest needs that they talk about is the soft skills on top of the academic and pedagogy that students learn, is the variety of intangible skills that they really look for to see if a graduate or a student is proficient in. So what are the challenges that we're dealing with? One is you have, it's all new information and knowledge. Interprofessional learning from each or within others are really generic, as Susan and Karen talked about, depending on the different fields, whether it be health fields, business fields, science, engineering, all of that is, again, what needs are various in ways, and you try to look at ways of how you can interprofessionally collaborate. The reaches are far above and beyond. It is a driving force for innovation in higher education. We've always had that traditional look of going through the 4 years and getting your bachelor's and, you know, going through the master's degree. This is a different kind of chunks taken in smaller levels, whether it be micromasters or micro credentials on a short period of time. And I think on a personal note, I've seen from many students that 4 years or even 2 years in this COVID era is a lifetime. So now it's really what type of skills can I attain to be able to use right away? So that's where the macro and micro come in, where the digital badging, I really try to portray and illustrate this to others, that it's kind of like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, where they do have badges for certain types of skill proficiency. You eventually get your way to become a Eagle Scout, but along the way you learn different tasks, which then you have a badge that you then put on your shirt, which illustrates your proficiency in that level. So it's kind of a unique way of looking at the analogy of how this badging process works. So you, again, bundling the skill sets that are important to students, value added for employers, as MJ illustrated with some of the badging that's been done in the BEST initiative. And then scaffolding, how can you then try a way of growing the platform by having it go up to different levels to be able to add more skills on top of the overall academic education that you attain. You can go on to the next slide, Karen, for yourself. There you go.
Yes, and so this is just kind of a, I don't know, a stair step I was thinking in terms of structure. And we do this in many ways. It's not just the idea of professions learning from and with each other, as the watermark says. We do this in many areas when we're even looking at a curriculum change or a new program that we want to create. But it also is really involved and in depth in the sense of just that phrase, professions learning from and with each other. We have the vision, and then we have to design, we have to come up with the plans of how we're going to work together and meet the needs of the student populations, the employers, and what will be so beneficial for all. Obviously, the competencies at the very end, how are we going to measure those? And so that takes a lot of strategy, and it will take faculty from across the board, not just from one discipline or even from one program or university, to work together to really develop this with the educative focus, and then to have our students then, and those that we're working with that may, as I mentioned before, may have lost their jobs and they're coming back in to get trained in certain areas that we're working with, say, a partnership. So then to get everyone at that point in time as market ready as we can. And with that, that's the end of our slides. Are there any questions? If not, I will turn it back over to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Actually, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Actually, I have two questions. First thing that concerns me a little bit about the badging, and I'm wondering if this is something that we should be looking at in CUSF, is how do we, if a badge is the best system, has, I know, competencies with describing, and maybe MJ will be familiar with what I'm about to say, I guess, but they describe what each competency would be to meet this badge. And the question that I have is there some assessment in place that is consistent across the system? So in other words, I know you want institutions to develop their assessments.
Yep, that was that whole part about the blue box in that slide is the co-development of the rubrics and the guidelines that we've created around the rigor that's required of each of the badges, so that it's not a one semester course. It's experiences that students are acquiring over time during their time on our campuses. We're not quite sure exactly how to quantify that yet, and I'm not sure we really want to. We're trying to strike that balance between allowing each of the institutions to develop these programs as uniquely as they need to for their local institutional mission. But yes, we have been co-developing those rubrics and all of the parameters around which those badges should be, and those badge programs, how they should look.
Yeah, I think that the thing that I'm worried about, or I think about, is dilution of the value of the badge. If it's awarded so much in so many ways.
If it helps our students connect the dots and be more articulate when they get into these job interviews, we're not sure we care, frankly.
Yeah.
And that was something that was actually the reason I could say that so quickly is after we had done a lot of that legwork with with Entangled Solutions and the regional employers, it became pretty clear to us, at least at that point in 2016. Now it's very different now, as Ed just described, but it was pretty clear the employers kind of didn't have a clue yet what to do about badges. And we sort of all looked at each other around the table and thought, gosh, so do we continue this work right now? And came to the conclusion that we believed that simply engaging in this activity would be great for our students, whether employers ever got it or not, because they would be at a place where they could, in fact, re-articulate the ways in which all of the things they've done during their time on our campuses add up to the acquisition of these skills. So I think, you know, it depends on what we're going for here. If we're looking at communicating the acquisition of these skills differently than a transcript and validating those skills, I think that's really as much for our students as it is for the employers. Down the road, when we're talking about, you know, I guess I'm not looking at the badges necessarily as a differentiator. I'm looking at them as a communication tool. Maybe that's the most simple way for me to respond.
And I think that's an important distinction, because we, you know, I asked you originally to separate out the differences between the certificates and all that. And I think that a lot of people think that it's not for communication. It's a step that towards that certificate, or the certificate and the badge needs to overlap. And so I'm thinking those distinctions may be important when we start developing assessments. That's all I'm thinking about.
Exactly. So one of the things too, just to add to what MJ said, sometimes as in our case, we develop the actual micro-credential for an organization. So for instance, in teamwork is one badge or one credential that they requested. And as in the example that MJ gave with Cisco, they would then have what type of core competencies that they're looking for the individual to attain, working with the institution so that the curriculum would be collaborated with together. And the outcome and assessment would then be, again, both agreed upon for the student to actually attain the credential in that way. So they knew what the student's proficiency level was after they've completed this. So there was somewhat of an agreement of what the training would be in that way, or what the academic curriculum would be in that way. So that really helps them both to be on the same level, because a lot of times when someone has a teamwork badge, you don't know what the curriculum was if it's universally looked at. But when you have an agreed upon criteria, that helps in that way. They can see what type of learning experience that they have and understand that the actual graduate or the employer knows what they're getting.
Yeah, I think that's important. I know I've been playing in terms of redefining my department with career pathways, which would be interdisciplinary, taking those looking at hard skills and soft skills for managers and employers, and all across the board, you know, in terms of giving a student, they've got 46 credits in their BS degree that they can choose from. And here's some pathways. Here's a way to build that separate a group of skill sets that will again be, you know, something the employer wants. They're management based, but they're at the same time, they come from all over the disciplines. So something like a badge can then be worked into, you know, if you developed a project that would go through all of those classes, and a badge would result. So in other words, that they've got a concrete, visible thing. Well, I worked on this project, and this is what we came up with, and here we can measure all of that. Right. So from an academic point of view, that's one way of using the badge. And then you're talking about it in terms of an employer's, almost like a training badge, though. That's a
Right. I mean, in my experience personally, I mean, Boeing had a number of programmers that were coming to them, but the programmers weren't skilled, and it wasn't part of the curriculum for them to deal with teamwork and organizational learning and organizational behavior. So they basically wanted to build this skill in. So there was a micro credential that could be used, and Boeing was part of the development of the curriculum. So you have programmers which really not part of the curriculum, but they need that soft skill, because when they walk in there, you're dealing with a group of 10 people working on a project. And is that person, he may be very proficient in coding, but are they proficient in the aspect of collaboration, teamwork, things like that? And you want to make sure that when hiring that person, or when that person graduating, is skilled in that area.
Okay. All right, people got their hands up. I'm going to stop talking.
I'll jump in. This is Marian. Very excited.
I can't see the hands though. I'm sorry.
Oh, you have to
Open the participant list.
Right. So MJ, I don't know if you saw my comment, but I perked up because my dissertation is on student employability and as it relates to college curriculum.
Excellent.
So yeah, I'm so excited, almost done. So I wonder, so what I'm looking at are the stakeholders in this kind of triangle, right? We have the students, we have higher education, us, and then we have the hirers. So I'm trying to understand, you know, what the buy-in would be for the hirers, and then what and what the literature would say about that, as well as the students. You know, now they're pretty much along for the ride and, you know, looking forward to graduation. But, you know, what do they feel the value would be in badging, and, you know, how do they feel, students?
So the students are looking for it not to be additive. They don't want more work, understandably. So, you know, at least when we did our badges, we tried to make sure that it fit pretty much into what they were already doing. And in fact, a lot of the assessment is already happening in courses. The co-curricular stuff's a little harder, but you know, Dora Santa Maria McKang's on the line here, and she can attest to the Frostburg work that they did with mapping their problem solver badge into specific courses and assignments in the courses. That's where that level of assessment is happening. Then the burden on the student is just to get to those milestone assessments, to maybe to write that additional reflection, to pull together all the evidence of acquisition of the skills, and to submit to an advisor or someone who is actually reviewing those materials and making sure that they did the things that they needed to do to get the badge. The employers, so increasingly we're seeing, and Ed had some of this in his slide, we're increasingly seeing employers that are taking these badges up in a big way. They're also issuing badges themselves, by the way. So we've got IBM that's issuing all sorts of in-house skills and opportunities for their employees to acquire skills, and they're issuing badges there, for example. They're partnering also with higher ed organizations to co-develop these badge earning pathways. So there's lots of exciting things happening at that point. One of the things is, I flew through it, but one of the slides that was up there that spoke to what employers are looking for in badges, they need to be quickly and easily digestible by the employer. It needs to mean something to them within their context. And frankly, there's also a technology component to this as well that I wasn't as aware of, since I don't have as much knowledge in the career development area, that you know, they're electronically vetting resumes by the thousands for jobs that they have, the big companies are. So actually IMS Global, who I've been a member of for some time, that does a lot of this technology standards work, is working with the resume vetting tools to make sure that badges show up as something in that vetting process, and says, hey, wait a minute, you know, MJ's got something more than just her English degree. She's also got this digital technology skill that may be of interest to us here at Lockheed Martin or whatever it might be. So we're seeing an awful lot of activity and interest and further development as we move forward on all three parts of that triangle that you mentioned.
That's great. I wanted to finish the question also.
Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped in. You see how excited I get. Sorry.
That's okay. I know it's an exciting thing. So how do you see the digital badge actually helping someone verbalize what they've done?
In our case, because of the way that we've developed this program, and we're requiring those reflections, and that the students are collecting evidence at each step of the way, they're able to, and the reflection questions are specific to tell us about how you're acquiring leadership skills up to this point in your experiences on our campuses. So they're getting that chance to reflect. They're actually being asked to pull together the evidence of the acquisition of those skills, so that by the time they get to that job interview, they're going to be able to say, yeah, you know, I was captain on the field hockey team, and here was a time that I had to demonstrate my ability to lead, and here's a time that I had to demonstrate my ability to follow.
Also, to quickly add on that, as you said, how to verbalize it, it probably in two ways that it does. One is you can actually espouse it by, badges typically represent competencies not shown on a transcript. So whether if someone asks you, what was your internship like, or what type of other co-curricular activities that you've done, this is a great opportunity to discuss certain proficiencies that you have that may not be shown just kind of in the words and numbers on there. And then secondly, students can use it as their own endorsements. LinkedIn actually has where you input the digital badge onto your LinkedIn page, which then has that there along with your academic background. It also has certain proficiencies that they know that you've completed, because that digital currency that's done on LinkedIn actually links in. And as MJ said, when they download that LinkedIn, they also download that badge, which has a code in there to show that you've completed it in a proper way.
Okay, I've got several people here, so I'm going to move on, Arian, if that's okay. And I think, Ara, did you have your hand up?
I see Susan has her hand up.
Now, Susan got hers up, I know that, and Joe
And
has hers
Joanne.
up. But I think okay.
Oh yeah, Dr. Sahu did have his hand up too.
He had his hand up and I just don't know where he is now. He took it down. All right, well, we'll move on to Susan. We'll come back to him again. Susan, you had something.
Where I'm still having a little bit of question in my mind is how we deal with the fact that I might have earned this badge, in the relevancy of my coursework. And I think you did a really good job of speaking to the fact that during the interview process, you would really elaborate on how it would relate to the context of the employer. But thinking in terms of the universality of them, in terms of how we work with our workforce here in Maryland, might there be some way we want to at least think through more strategically how we begin to integrate these badges into curricula, as opposed to being individually at the university level, so that perhaps a badge that comes out of University of Maryland College Park might not be so different than one comes from Salisbury with those credentials, because at the end of the day, those students are going to be pitted against each other in the workforce.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid concern. There are also, so Credential Engine, which is funded by Lumina, and a bunch of other organizations that are working on trying to create some of those kinds of standards. I think we're going to see a lot of the technology background in the badge also create some standardization. So a badge carries with it all of that evidence and articulation of what the learning objective was, so that a critical thinker badge at one institution is going to look very much and be at the same level as a critical thinker badge at another institution. But one thing that I worry a little bit about, and this came out of a conversation actually just yesterday with, I had the chance to present to the College of Education at College Park. I think we want to avoid this becoming another, we don't want it to be another degree. We don't want it to become another full-blown, degree program that becomes as complicated and as unagile as our current degree programs are. I think we want to be sure that we are rigorous. I don't mean to suggest otherwise, but it's the same time capitalizing on the innovation here to use this as a communication tool and not to use it to replicate what we're already doing. There are affordances of this badge as a technology that make it very different than, dividing a 3-credit course into single credits and issuing a badge for each credit. We already have a syntax for that. We're already doing that. The badge adds no value in that case. Similarly, in some of the conversations we're having with the Greater Washington Partnership, the specialist badges that they have, that badge for, let's say, cybersecurity skills, really map almost one-for-one onto our degree programs. Well, we've already got a syntax for that. It's a degree, and our cybersecurity majors aren't having any trouble finding a job. Why do we need a badge on top of that? Whereas the digital generalist credential that we're working with them on, which takes an English major and says, MJ's has had this course and this course and this course in technology skills, and she's beginning to acquire those supplemental skills, Susan, you were talking about this earlier, that make her more marketable as an English major to various kinds of companies. Now that's a really good application of the badge because it's encouraging me to engage in those skills. It articulates and communicates them in a different way than might be readily apparent on my transcript, and allows me to begin to see as a student, oh gosh, you know, all I need to do is this course or to engage in this boot camp or whatever it's going to be, and I'll get that badge and I'll be ready to apply for the communications job at Lockheed Martin or at Amazon because I've also got these technology skills. So I think we have to be really careful not to make the badge into yet another MHEC approved credential.
I would agree to that. And I think that's what an advantage of a school and an institution to be able to create these more quicker and more innovatively, because if you do have to go through the full MHEC and maybe SACS or whatever credentialing process or accreditation, I mean, it's going to be a long process to try to get through, and it kind of dissolves a little bit the learned skill that you want to basically, not necessarily a degree, but a learned skill that you want people to attain.
And as long as we're using these tools to communicate clearly the learning outcomes for our students, Middle States is thrilled, and MHEC is also very happy about it.
Okay, Dr. Sahu, you had your hand up earlier. I'm going to put you back in front of Joe. No offense, Joe. Hello?
You're muted.
I'm not, but he is.
Yeah, the effort MJ is making is a great effort. I think I echo that. There will be questions from the academic area saying, well, you know, is it course-like, or it is a seminar-like, or it is a certificate-like? But we had to, you know, stay away from those questions, just respond them in a manner exactly just what you, MJ mentioned, because these are gap filters, you know, filler, and these badges are giving pathway to the special workforce to meet their demand at that particular time, and that particular requirements of that particular thing. So these are extremely important badges, and it is in a modular form in terms of how they are being delivered and how they are being assessed, and what, you know, rubrics you use is going to be slightly more innovative than the routine rubrics we use. So I really commend this effort, and we need to keep on going on that, rather than getting into the issue of courses and breaking the courses into badges and stuff like that. So thank you very much, MJ, what you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, Joe, you're up.
Fine. MJ, I know you have to go, that you've got another meeting that you're 20 minutes late to or whatever, but I just wanted to say that as far as communication and thinking through, in my mind, one of the reasons that these badges can be so important is for us on the faculty and administrative side to think differently about what we are teaching our students. We keep getting asked, what's the value of a college degree? Well, if we think differently about this, and if we connect the dots more clearly, I think we're going to be able to articulate the breadth and depth of the value of a college degree, no matter what the major. So in fact, not only does this help the students connect the dots, it's one of the reasons that, Elizabeth, I appreciate your bringing MJ and this group together so that we can really start thinking about this across the entire curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much. I don't see any other hands, and we are going to run behind. I know, MJ, you have to go.